Hi guys, and happy Victober! It is officially October, which means that the Victorian October readathon is happening. If you didn't see my recent announcement video, I'll leave that in the description and up here, whichever side it is, so you can go and watch that. But basically, Victorian October or Victober is a readathon where you try and read Victorian literature during the month of October, and this year I am one of the hosts. So today I'm going to be sharing my TBR with you, which I do think is a bit ambitious this year. But I got a bit carried away because me, Katie, Kate and Ange were all in a group chat. We were all sharing our recommendations, so I couldn't help but keep adding books to the list. So I'm going to go through a challenge by challenge and then talk about the ones that don't fit into a challenge. I'm definitely not going to read all of these because I'm very busy at the moment, but we'll see what happens. I'm excited to read some of these, if not all of them, and I am just super excited for Victober. So the first book that I want to read in October, and the main one I'm going to be concentrating on, is North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. I'm reading this for my challenge, which is to read a book that somebody else has recommended to you, and this was recommended to me in last year's Victorian October TBR pile by Lucy from the Book Bell, and it's also one of author Catherine Core's favourite books. So I'm reading it on both of their recommendations, and I'm really excited to read some more Elizabeth Gaskell. I kind of want to read this one because it's been made into a BBC adaptation, and I've heard that it's absolutely amazing, and I love period dramas, so I kind of want to read it and then watch it. But this is by Elizabeth Gaskell, and I have read Cranford by her. Didn't love it, but I still thought it was good. But I went into it knowing it wasn't her best book, but this is often called her best book. This is another one of those books, like Shirley by Charlotte Bronte, which is about industrialisation but concentrates on the female characters. Because I love Shirley so much, and because this one sounds similar, I'm sure I'm going to love it. Then for the challenge to read a book by a Scottish, Irish or Welsh author, and for the challenge to read an underrated book, I am going to read By Berwin Banks by Alan Rain, which I've downloaded onto my Kindle. It's a public domain book, and this was written in 1899, so only just counts as a Victorian book. But this is an interesting one because she is called Alan Rain, or she's writing as Alan Rain, but her real name is Anne Adeliza Bainan Puddicombe. So she's another one of the authors who used a male pseudonym, and I'm really fascinated by that and how that affects the contents of the book. So that's something I'd like to explore when I read it. In fact, this book is so underrated that it only has 1 rating on Goodreads, so I'm hoping to read it and make that 2. Because it's so unknown, I have no clue what it's about, but I am looking forward to reading something by a Welsh author because I still feel like even now it's very much the fashion at the moment, like big Irish authors are quite in, and English authors of course, and a bit of Scottish writing too, but I feel like we forget about our Welsh authors quite a lot. So I'm looking forward to reading this, and I will definitely feed back because it might be one that people really enjoy, but it's just been forgotten, and so sometimes we need to revive the books that we talk about, and so that's why I'm looking forward to reading it. Then for Kate's Supernatural challenge, I was very tempted to reread Wuthering Heights, but I'm going to save that until later in the year. So for this challenge I decided to read The Lifted Veil by George Eliot. I've never read any George Eliot, but as you'll see in a minute, I want Victober to be the month that I finally read some George Eliot. And this on the back says, in this chilling novella of Victorian horror, George Eliot explores clairvoyance, fate, and the possibility of life after death. And this is the Penguin Little Black Classics edition, which comes with The Lifted Veil, which is only about 70 pages, and then an essay by George Eliot called Silly Novels by Lady Novelist, because she was quite a prolific essay writer too. So I would love to read some books by George Eliot this month. And then the overall book that we are going to be reading together is The Mill on the Floss by George Eliot. So I'm going to have a lot of opportunity to read books by her. On the back it says, about The Mill on the Floss, tragic and moving, The Mill on the Floss is a novel of grand passions and tormented lives, which sounds really interesting. It is quite a long book, so I'm going to have to pace myself and set myself a certain amount of pages each day. I think that's going to be the best way that I think I'll go about it. But I am looking forward to reading it a lot and finally finding out what the fuss is all about with George Eliot's books, because I've heard so much that I can appreciate them, but I've never read them for myself, so I just need to do that. Then another book that a few of us have organised to read that I wasn't originally going to be a part of, but I couldn't pass up the opportunity, is The Life of Charlotte Bronte by Elizabeth Gaskell. This is a really interesting book because I know a lot about it, because obviously I am a Bronte nerd. I'm sure you all know that. I mention them in every video. I mean, if you've been around for a while, you know that. So The Life of Charlotte Bronte was the first biography of Charlotte Bronte after she died. It was kind of commissioned by her father, but the way that Patrick Bronte, their father, was portrayed, the way that Branwell was portrayed, is in a way that isn't very complimentary. And in fact, the Victorian biography is a very interesting form because it is very much there to preserve the image of the author. So I read a while back a biography of Jane Austen, which was very much, yes, she was this amazing woman. She was very, very moral. And this is a bit what the life of Charlotte Bronte is like. It's very much like Charlotte Bronte was this amazing moral woman who always went to church and stuff like that. So it's not portraying that coarseness that comes out in the Bronte's works. But I'm looking forward to reading it anyway, because I feel like it's the book you have to read and then you read another later biography that really solidifies the facts of the Brontes rather than just Elizabeth Gaskell's storytelling and the way she makes things up. Because Patrick and Branwell really were vilified, even though I don't think Elizabeth Gaskell ever met Branwell, but she did meet Patrick and she met Charlotte's husband, and they were portrayed in a really awful manner. So I'm looking forward to reading it and forming my own opinion based off of it. I think it'll be really good, and I love this cover. I love this portrait of Charlotte. I think it's really great. It's based on George Richmond's portrait of her, and it's the only Bronte biography as well by someone who actually met Charlotte Bronte, so that is another interesting thing to consider when reading it. Another book that I'm sure will count for the underrated book challenge is The Children of the New Forest by Captain Marryat. And this book is a bit of a family heirloom. This was given to a relation of mine in June 1926, and it's been in the family ever since, and this was given to me by my grandpa because he recommended that I read it, and I've had it for about 2 years now and just haven't read it. I'm really interested to read it because it's a children's book. So it says, in addition to these novels, he wrote a number of stories for young people. So is this an early YA novel? That is what I want to read and find out, because I think that's going to be a really interesting thing to consider. Is this a book meant for teenagers before the commercial YA market was a thing? It's set during the English Civil War, which is a period I'm really interested in. I would love to write a historical fiction novel set during the Civil War at some point, so I'm trying to read as much set during that period as I can, but it's very hard to find books that are set then. They just don't seem to be published. It's not an area that people are particularly interested in, or if they are, it's quite niche stuff. So I'm trying to find as many books as I can, and I think it's going to be a real joy to read. And then the final book that I'm hoping to read during Victober is a book by one of my favourite Victorian authors. Of course, it is Thomas Hardy, and I would like to read Two on a Tower, which is not a Thomas Hardy book I've heard too much about. I was going to read something like Jude the Obscure or The Mayor of Casterbridge, but I decided that I would be quite interested in reading this instead. It is described as an atmospheric moving story of star-crossed lovers and how it shows human beings at the mercy of forces far beyond their control, which are some of the themes I love most about Thomas Hardy's books. I think this is going to be slightly more like Tess the Daffodils than Far From the Madding Crowd, and I like both of them but in very different ways. So I'm looking forward to reading more Thomas Hardy finally. I love his books, but I don't feel like I've read enough of them yet to confidently talk about them, so I'm trying to get through as many of them as I can, and I feel like October is the perfect time to read Thomas Hardy. I feel like the autumn and the spring, that is Thomas Hardy season, and I love it. I just can't wait to read more Thomas Hardy. I love him. I'd marry him. He was awesome. So that was my Victober TBR pile. I am so excited to get reading and read as many of these as possible. It is quite overambitious, but oh well. When am I ever sensible? I just like to challenge myself really and read as many books as I can. It's not too late for you to join in. If at any point in the month you decide that you want to join in, you don't have to make a TBR pile. You could just tweet a picture or Instagram a picture, but I'd love to see your TBR piles. So tweet me a link at Lucy the Reader or tag me in a photo on Instagram. I'm also Lucy the Reader over there. Send me the links to all your stuff because I am so interested to see what you will be reading during Victober. So I hope you enjoyed this video and I will see you guys soon. Happy reading!